Hello, friends. It's good to be with you. It's been a few weeks, and I apologize for not getting anything out sooner. I was very busy and then sick and then busy again. But here we are. That's the good news. So it's been an interesting few weeks. Pioneer Day, let me just catch you up there. That was a lot of fun. So we put up a billboard in North Salt Lake that could be seen as you're coming from the north into Salt Lake. To get the traffic going to the Pioneer Day parade and things like that. That was fun. I decked out my van into a Monogomobile. So it has window stickers and bumper magnets and QR codes all over it. And it was a lot of fun driving that around. I saw one guy in my rearview mirror. I came to a stoplight. And as he pulled up behind me, I saw him scan the QR code with his phone. And then he spent the whole rest of the light. It was a long red light, and he just kept looking at his phone and looking up to see if it had turned green. So I know he saw some things. And other people would just pull up beside me and give me a thumbs up or honk or wave. So that was a lot of fun. We're going to have a whole caravan of us doing that one day and just be a spectacle and get the word out. It's super fun. So all right. The bad news, as a lot of you already know, is that the church historians have doubled down on the Joseph Smith polygamy narrative and added some new things to the church website. I'll put them up on the screen here. So this one actually has the question, did Joseph Smith practice plural marriage, or was it introduced by Brigham Young and others? And they say, Joseph Smith introduced the practice, not Brigham Young. Credible contemporary sources document Joseph's practice of plural marriage. I can't even begin to imagine what credible sources those are. Later, many faithful men and women who knew of Joseph's practice of plural marriage gave sworn testimony of it. Yeah, that would be much later, 25 years and beyond. Rather than deny this historical practice, we can apply the principles outlined in Seeking Answers to Questions to help us better understand it. So yeah, I don't think any of us deny the historical practice. I know that it wasn't Joseph Smith practicing it. I believe what he said when he said he didn't practice it. So that's the difference. There's another place where it says, Emma did not leave any contemporary record of her own thoughts, feelings, or experiences related to plural marriage. Wow, that's just an extraordinary claim. Again, most of you know this, or if you've seen my video, you know that Emma herself made edits to a document called The Voice of Innocence, and she read it by her own mouth to crowds of hundreds, if not thousands, of people in March of 1844, and it included this scathing condemnation of all forms of sexual sin, including polygamy. While the marriage bed undefiled is honorable, let polygamy, bigamy, fornication, adultery, and prostitution be frowned out of the hearts of honest men to drop in the gulf of fallen nature, where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. So that's pretty clear. I think we can discern her feelings if we really try on that. So these claims are just not accurate at all. Okay, so Brian Hales asked Stephen Pynakker if he could come on his show to talk about this, and he was also on Greg Madson's show on CWIC Media. And in both of these interviews, he brings up my video, Woe Unto You Scribes, but he tells a little fib about it, or a big whopper about it. I don't know. So let's listen to the clip.
I recently listened to a video, and it's not by one of the leading YouTubers. I'm not going to mention names, but it was called Woe Unto You Scribes. And at the end, she's talking about Eliza R. Snow, and she concludes with this sentence. She says, Eliza cannot be considered a credible witness. Now, that's a nice way of saying Eliza R. Snow is a liar. And then that's it. They move on. They don't tell us, was she lying about other things? What would make her want to lie? What was making her, in their version of church history, what was making Eliza R. Snow lie?
Okay, and he said the exact same thing in the other interview, that I didn't give any reason for saying that Eliza Snow was not a credible witness. And I know most of you have seen the movie, but just to refresh our memories, let's watch the small section on Eliza R. Snow.
Eliza R. Snow. On October 1st, 1842, in response to accusations of polygamy by enemies of Joseph Smith, including John C. Bennett, Eliza joined several women in signing a declaration that they knew of no other system of marriage being practiced in the church except monogamy. We, the undersigned members of the Ladies' Relief Society and married females, do certify and declare that we know of no system of marriage being practiced in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, save the one contained in the Book of Doctrine and Covenants. And we give this certificate to the public to show that John C. Bennett's secret wife system is a disclosure of his own make. 27 years later, however, Eliza signed an affidavit swearing that she had been sealed to Joseph Smith in June of 1842, over 3 months before she signed the declaration that polygamy was not practiced in the church. So either the 1842 declaration was a deception, or the 1869 affidavit was falsely sworn. In either case, Eliza cannot be considered a credible witness.
So who knows why he got that so wrong? In an interview he was on back in November, he told the host that my video was so long that he could only make it through half an hour of it. So maybe he hasn't seen it, or he did say that he listened to it. He told Steve and Greg that he listened to it. So maybe he's listened to the whole thing. Maybe he nodded off at a critical part and just, woke up in time to hear me say that she wasn't a credible witness. But things like that can happen, and that's fine. But if I were going to go on an interview and talk about it, I definitely would rewind that part and watch it again just to make sure I had it right. So what I think is valuable here is that it really gives us a glimpse into his scholarly rigor or lack thereof. If he's going to get this wrong, that's in plain English, it's right here, you can rewind, you can listen to it as many times as you want. There's literally an email address at my website. He could have asked me for clarification if he didn't understand. He's not having to sift through some old documents or decipher handwriting or try to figure out whose handwriting it is or who said what. It's all right there, and he got it wrong. So can we imagine that he would do any better with 150-year-old documents? I feel like this is really, really helpful for us to see his lack of scholarly rigor when he treats these documents. So I hopped on the comment section in Greg's video and made the correction, spelled it out, showed it where it was in my video, gave the timestamp, and explained how Eliza had contradicted herself very clearly. And also, when I saw him say the same thing a day or two later on the Steve Pynakker interview, I got on there to do the same thing and saw that Gary Arnell, my friend, had already jumped on there with a fantastic comment. He corrected Brian on that, and he corrected him on several things that Brian just got patently wrong, and laid it all out, gave documentation for it, quotes. It was fantastic. So I highly recommend you go over there just to see Gary's comment, if nothing else. So I'll include the link to that. Brian's main purpose on these interviews seems to be that he wanted to try to convince people to minimize the documentation and focus more on what it would mean for subsequent church leaders if Joseph were telling the truth and if he had not practiced polygamy, as he said he didn't. What would that mean for the later church leaders? So he points out that if Joseph was telling the truth, then these later leaders were not telling the truth. So here's how he puts it.
If we're going to keep talking about, was Joseph a polygamist or wasn't he not, let's make sure people understand, if they want to accept this version of Joseph that he wasn't practicing, didn't introduce polygamy in Nauvoo, let's make sure people realize when you pick up one end of that stick, you pick up the other end. And the other end is that you believe Brigham and Lorenzo and John and Wilford and Zina and Eliza and Bathsheba were all liars.
So he's very upset that if Joseph was telling the truth, that would mean that these other people were lying. But he doesn't seem bothered that if we say Brigham Young was telling the truth, then that means that Joseph and Emma and Hiram and Lucy Mack and Joseph III and others were lying. I mean, you pick up both ends of that stick too, right? So the double standard is not just puzzling, but it's illogical, because we have lots of instances where Brigham and John Taylor and other leaders are not telling the truth. For instance, Brigham Young in 1852, for example, he said, "The world have known long ago, even in Brother Joseph's days, that he had more wives than one." But then in 1869, he told Senator Lyman Trumbull that polygamy was not originally part of our system, but was adopted by us as a necessity after we came here to Utah. So he's contradicted himself. So one of those is not true, or perhaps both of them aren't true. John Taylor in 1850, while on a mission in France, he spoke to a large gathering of people and flat out denied practicing polygamy at all, even though he already had several wives. So to this group, he said, "We are accused here of polygamy and actions the most indelicate, obscene, and disgusting, such that none but a corrupt and depraved heart could have contrived. These things are too outrageous to admit of belief. I shall content myself by reading our views of chastity and marriage from the Doctrine and Covenants." And then he quotes what was section 109 at the time, the article on marriage that was still in the Doctrine and Covenants. "Inasmuch as this Church of Jesus Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife and one woman but one husband, except in case of death." And again, John Taylor had at least 10 wives by this time, according to a BYU Religious Studies Center article entitled, and I am not making this up, "John Taylor, Family Man." Wilford Woodruff in 1890 said, "We are not teaching polygamy or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice." And yet scholars universally agree and acknowledge that this was completely false and that they continued to permit polygamous marriages for at least 14 years after this. Lorenzo Snow and Joseph F. Smith, Brian talks a bit about these two himself. Let's listen.
And when you talk about the period from 1890 to 1904, we have about a dozen plural marriages on average. I mean, it went in spurts. What you find during Lorenzo Snow's presidency, there were less, but we find on average about a dozen plural marriages are allowed by the first presidency over that 14-year period on average.
I've heard the number was closer to 200, but you're saying it was only a couple dozen?
It was a dozen per year.
Oh, a dozen per year.
Up to 200 to 300. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
So either way, and I'll be honest with you. I mean, this is an embarrassment. They tried to do some in Canada where it was also illegal, and they tried to do some in Mexico where it was also illegal. But at least they wouldn't have been lying on the Utah or on the American side. But a lot of them were performed in the States. And so the church leaders were embarrassed when Joseph F. Smith went back east and was grilled by on deposition because of Reed Smoot's hearings. He came back and could see that there's just no way they can carry on this double standard. But yeah, you bring up a good point. During that period, they're not being entirely truthful.
All right. We already talked about Eliza R. Snow and her contradictory statements. As for Zina Huntington Young, one of the things that she said was that it is the duty of a first wife to learn to regard her husband with indifference and with no other feeling than that of reverence. For love we regard as a false sentiment, a feeling which should have no existence in polygamy. So should we believe Zina that love is a false sentiment and that we should regard our husbands with indifference to make polygamy work for us? I would say no. But here's the deal. If someone like Brian or someone else wants to believe these people over Joseph and Emma and Hiram, that is their prerogative. I would never demand that they be kicked out of the church for this. Joseph himself taught very clearly that we should be allowed to believe as we wish. He said, "The Methodists have creeds which a man must believe or be kicked out of their church. I want the liberty of thinking and believing as I please. It feels so good not to be trammeled." I love that, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. If you have to force someone to think as you do, then it means that your arguments are not persuasive. So let's allow each other to interpret the history as we see fit. I've talked to multiple historians who, off the record, are appalled that people are being excommunicated or threatened with excommunication if they don't stop talking about Joseph's monogamy as they see it. And they're just aghast that people are getting kicked out of the church for interpreting the historical documents at face value and for interpreting them as they wish. So that's a real shame. The good news, and it is really good news, is that the comment that I put on the CWIC media comment section about Eliza R. Snow, that comment over just a couple hours got like 60 likes. And same with Gary Arnell's comment on the other video. It got a lot of good feedback and lots of likes. And if you look at the comment sections on those, especially on Greg Madson's, it is at least 10-1 in favor of the narrative that Joseph was telling the truth. And they were like, it's the polygamy deniers that have the documents on their side. Brian Hales isn't even addressing these things and stuff like that. So it was so heartening to see that kind of response. On a show where the host and the guest were both on the same side, people in the comments section were saying, we're not buying it. And I loved it. I'm so grateful. The message is getting out. So please keep sharing it. Share it kindly. Share it as kindly as you can. I promise that this message will get out in the best way and in the fastest way if we can be kind and compassionate and allow people to believe as they want. If they want to believe that he was a polygamist, they're free to do that. I am offering this information to people, but I'm not upset if they reject it. So we're just giving them the chance. So I think that's the best way to share it. And, maybe a bumper sticker or two here and there will do the job. All right. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.